But the people are willing to clean out their own debris. It doesn't cost a lot.
Yes, and they can.
You should let them do it, because by the time you hire contractors, it's going to be 2 years.
If a family...
The people are willing to get a dumpster and do it themselves and clean it out.
And they can.
There's not that much left. It's all incinerated.
That's right.
And, it's just going to take a long time if you do. You can do some of it, but a lot of these people, I know that guy right there that's talking. I know my people. You'll be on that thing tonight, throwing the stuff away, and your site it'll look perfect within 24 hours, and that's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to wait around for 7 months till the city hires some demolition contract that's going to charge him $25,000 to do his lot. Yeah. I think you have emergency powers just like I do, and I'm exercising my emergency powers. You have to exercise them also.
I did exercise them.
Because you have a very powerful emergency power, and you can do everything within 24 hours.
Yes.
You guys remember that clip of President Trump going after Karen Bass at this particular press conference, going after California officials for all the different regulations and permitting requirements that they typically have that restrict the rebuild, that are hurting the people on the ground who are just victimized by the fact that their homes burned up. And Karen Bass responded to the evil orange man by saying, look, we're going to accelerate the process. We're going to make sure everybody could get in their permits and all the stuff that they're required from one central location, and this is going to be done lickety-split. Don't worry about it. It's all going to be good in the hood. And a bunch of different left-wing people have decided to say, by the way, that it was evil white racism for Karen Bass to be criticized for this. This was something that has been brought up on a great number of left-wing shows.
DSA Josh, I live on the west side of LA. All the criticism that conservatives are directing towards Mayor Karen Bass is 100% motivated by white nationalism and violent misogyny. They're fascists, full stop. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can say 100% of anything is anything these days, but certainly it's when you start hearing people talking about DEI.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire, which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
When you start hearing people talking about DEI.
Yeah, that's Nazi stuff.
Do we have that Bill Burr clip?
And in reality, any criticism of these Democratic Party officials is rude, it's nonsensical, and it doesn't need to be brought up right now or at all in any way, shape, or form, because the fire is just a natural disaster, and honestly, nothing could be done to prevent this. I mean, we're not going to ever talk about the fact that you had a Pacific Palisades reservoir, the Santa Ynez Reservoir.
This was supposed to be the water to put out the Palisades fire. This is the Santa Ynez Reservoir. It's the water supply basically for the Palisades. When they first started fighting the Palisades fire, they ran out of water extremely quickly. Wednesday, 3 a.m., they were basically out. And there's been a lot of talk on why this happened. So how long has this reservoir been empty for?
Since February of last year.
That holds 117 million gallons of water that was decommissioned because of a repair from February of last year. That should have taken, by the way, a week to complete, but in reality wasn't done almost a year later, thus leaving this particular area with only 3 1 million gallon backups. That's not important. Adam Conover told us that's not important, and we all are just going to pay attention to none of this stuff and focus on the fact that Karen Bass said she was going to speed up the recovery. Well, it turns out that is not happening. It turns out the graft, the theft of the California taxpayers is real. It's already starting, and even the Los Angeles Times is calling out the Bass administration and Gavin Newsom for their complete and total mismanagement of this particular problem. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I will remind you that my friend Devin Tracy, a real-life consequence of this, his parents actually lost their home in the California wildfires. Now, he started a GoFundMe in order to raise money for them. If you're a fan of Devin or a fan of mine and you want to donate and you're able to, please do. If you're not a fan of Devin, you don't like him, or you can't donate and thus you're not going to, that's totally fine. Just trying to help a friend. So there's an article that was released on February 8th of this year from the Los Angeles Times entitled, "Who's in Charge of the Palisades Fire Recovery?" The answer has gotten complicated. And this goes over some of the different players that have been installed by Mayor Karen Bass, who, by the way, is promising to cut through the red tape, accelerate the permitting process and all that in order to make this more complicated than it needs to be. And one of the first things that drew a lot of red flags from many people that were observing this is that she ended up putting a businessman in charge of the Palisades specifically at a salary of $500,000. Now, we were told that this wasn't going to be a taxpayer salary. Don't worry about that. That's no big deal. That in reality, this money was going to come from the nonprofits that are partnering with the government and, of course, the private entities in order to make this a convoluted mess. And I will just point out that many nonprofits do receive money from the taxpayers, but in addition to that, if you donated to the California wildfire victims through some of these nonprofits, you're not expecting it to go to somebody who's going to make $500,000 for 3 months worth of consulting. Now, the recovery czar called Steve Soberoff was supposed to be paid the $500,000 over the course of 3 months, and the money was supposed to come from the nonprofits. Now, Mayor Karen Bass announced that she was going to hire an additional consulting firm that also deals with disaster response, and the firm is supposed to report to an official recently hired in the city's emergency management department.
As the cleanup and rebuilding moves forward, a new piece in the LA Times poses the question, who's in charge of Palisades fire recovery? The answer? It's gotten complicated.
Julia Wick is a staff writer at the LA Times. She joins us now with more on the increasingly complicated recovery chain of command. And Julia, Governor Newsom was at the Eaton Fire burn area today talking about the layered approach to rebuilding. Let's take a listen first and then we'll talk.
Phase 1. Concurrently stacking with phase 2. Phase 2 now stacking with the work the supervisor's done to expedite permits, one-stop shop, the state overlaying their efforts to expedite any waivers as it relates to some of the state impacts.
So, Julia, the governor makes it sound simple, but when you look at the organizational chart that has emerged in the Palisades fire, you have government agencies, nonprofits, consulting firms, and more. Is this becoming a case of too many cooks in the kitchen?
So again, one of the major problems in the state of California is that it takes so long to do anything. It takes forever to build anything. You have environmental groups that are always suing the state, always suing the cities, suing developers, and all these different other various problems. And Karen Bass's response to this, what is supposed to streamline all the different permitting processes, all the different environmental processes, was to hire a completely new position in the Department of Emergency Management, then hire a consultant to consult on the Palisades recovery, and then hire a third additional consulting firm to also consult on the recovery. And by the way, that salary from the Steve Soberoff guy, it was so embarrassing for the city of Los Angeles that this guy was going to be taking all this money out of the nonprofits that he actually agreed to work for free. However, it's obvious that his role is severely limited because after he agreed to work for free, it appears they hired this other firm. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit.
Following an uproar over the planned salary for LA Mayor Karen Bass's newly appointed chief recovery officer, Steve Soberoff has agreed now to work for free. Yesterday, we confirmed the businessman and former LA police commissioner had been slated to make $500,000 for just 90 days of work. The mayor's office told us that he would have been paid by philanthropic organizations and not LA taxpayers. Then, late last night, Bass's office released a statement saying that Soberoff has agreed to modify his agreement and work for free. He's been tasked with working to protect properties and creating a detailed program to rebuild the burn areas.
So again, in addition to that recovery czar who was originally going to be paid $500,000, but now is going to be working for free, allegedly, she has also decided to hire an additional firm. It is called Hagerty Consulting Firm. It is an Illinois-based firm that is supposedly an expert in disaster management. Now, according to the LA Times, they are hired to provide, quote, full project management of the recovery, and the firm, she said, will report to Jim Featherstone, who returned to the city workforce after the fire to become the number 2 at the emergency management department. Now, Featherstone actually ran this agency from 2007 to 2016 and is in charge of the disaster recovery group overseen by the agency and is paid over $200,000 in annual salary. Now, look, I know the cost of living is very high in the city of Los Angeles. I live in a big blue city, New York City, and the cost of living is extraordinarily high here as well, but something rubs me the wrong way about all these different various public sector workers who, in addition to this, by the way, get great healthcare benefits, making not only six-figure salaries, like, around $100K, which maybe you could argue makes sense for managing this particular area for the city, but making $200,000 in it. Then in addition to that, they have full benefits, full healthcare and all that, a pension. It seems rather insane, rather crazy. And again, this is supposedly the new person that is in charge under the agency agency that's actually in charge, because he's the number 2, consulting with the Steve guy, who was also in charge, but also consulting with Hagerty Consulting, who's also in charge of the recovery. And remember, the buck stops with Karen Bass, who's also in charge of the recovery. And in addition to that, the buck stops with Gavin Newsom, who is also in charge of said recovery. Do you see how this is an overconvoluted mess already? Do you see how so many people are already enriching themselves with these lavish salaries off of this process? Again, already at this moment in time, when people aren't even allowed to go see their homes and clear their debris. Again, it's an absolute disaster. But again, we need to get into Hagerty Consulting, because even though they're billed as this Illinois-based firm that's an absolute expert in terms of their recovery and managing these projects and whatnot, they actually have a very interesting history. Now, a lot of people are highlighting that they've advocated for environmental justice and global warming nonsense and all that. Of course, people have also pointed out that they've advocated for reparations and all sorts of activism. But to be clear, it seems like the people that are in charge individually were advocating for that. I want to talk about the consulting firm as a whole, because this is actually a popular disaster management firm that has been hired for many a disaster, including the Hurricane Sandy recovery in New York and New Jersey, as major consultants. And the reason I bring this up is because it is being reported by Breitbart that 2 individuals that were working on that recovery for New York and New Jersey, dealing with federal funds in terms of the Sandy relief, were actually prosecuted for stealing that money. 2 former disaster recovery experts at Hagerty Consulting Firm, which Mayor Karen Bass appointed to lead the rebuilding efforts after the recent wildfires, pleaded guilty in 2022 and 2023 to defrauding New York City of Hurricane Sandy relief funds. Walter Melnick, who had been hired as a contractor for Evanston, Illinois-based Hagerty Consulting Firm, was accused in 2022 of having claimed lodging reimbursements, which he was not entitled, and making false statements to investigators. Melnick was described in a press release by another firm as having managed New York City's post-Sandy $15 billion recovery program while at Haiti. He has since evidently retired from the industry. Another then Hagerty consultant, Martin O'Mara, was accused of claiming more than $250,000 in reimbursements, which he was not entitled, and trying to destroy evidence. Now, according to this Breitbart article, they were able to steal $380,000 and $250,000 respectively, and of course, they both pled guilty to their crimes and ended up with 2 years probation, and then the other one just says general probation, and of course, we're told that they have to pay back that particular money.
Mentioned the mayor, Julia. Where does Karen Bass fit into this? She's told reporters she is at the top of the chain of command, saying the person that's in charge here is me. Her words. Is that your sense?
She's certainly at the top of the city command, and I think that is what she was referring to. But it's a little more complicated because obviously the mayor is not sort of touching every single piece. So you really want to know who is her number 2, who's the person who's leading response for her in the city. And that's more of an open question. We have Steve Soboroff, a longtime civic leader who is Bass's chief recovery officer. But it seems like in recent days, she has sort of narrowed the scope of his job. We also have Jim Featherstone, who's number 2 at the City Emergency Management Center. And he is who the outside consultant will be reporting to. So it's sort of not clear who's kind of leading under her.
Now, the reason I highlight this is not just to randomly disparage the firm that Karen Bass decided to hire in addition to the guy that she decided to hire for consulting on the recovery of this particular project. It's just to point out that when you have all this money flowing around, sometimes people who are working at these firms feel like they can get away with stealing a lot of this money, and many a times that they don't get caught. But in addition to that, the fact of the matter is the people managing this money oftentimes don't really do anything to accelerate the process. Again, this firm is not going to have any kind of authority to accelerate permits and whatnot. They're just consulting on how you should think about maybe considering rebuilding. So the legitimate money that they seem to be getting from the taxpayer and then from the federal government, who's going to have to send disaster relief, ends up going out the side door to these different organizations. And again, we've seen this repeatedly repeatedly in the state of California time and time again. Again, we heard about the $24 billion that was funneled into the homeless industrial complex that is completely unaccounted for in the state of California over the course of 5 years. And the way that this money ends up disappearing is that it gets funneled through all these different various nonprofits and consulting organizations and all these people who are ready to do some preparation and talk about how we have to think about addressing maybe in the future at some point in time the homeless problem. And by the time you actually get to the street level, by the time you actually get to the people that are affected, all the money is gone. And by the way, the conclusion that many of these firms end up coming to is that, yeah, we actually need to be paid more money, because if you give us more money, then all the different people that will grab at it before it reaches the end, there'll be more left over once you get to that end point. It's actually really sad. It's actually really absurd. It's ridiculous in every possible way, but nobody should be surprised by this. You have all these different politicians promising to cut the bureaucracy and all that, but we saw those promises in Maui. We saw those promises with those fires, and what ultimately ended up happening? The governor tried doing that. He ended up getting sued by a bunch of different environmental organizations, and nothing has really been rebuilt over in Hawaii in terms of the recovery for that particular fire. California has just as many, if not more, regulations and environmental groups that are emboldened to sue them over everything. So all these different consultants are actually going to be layers on top of layers of more bureaucracy, which just goes to show you that President Trump's sharp criticism of Karen Bass was not only valid, but it was quite salient and absolutely necessary, because when this recovery takes forever, when these people don't get back on their feet, when all these other people are cashing their paychecks for years in this recovery, and we haven't even broken ground, we haven't even cleared the debris, that record needs to be there. We need to be able to point to it, because it's exactly why these recoveries take so long in states like the state of California. But of course, those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the recovery disaster in the state of California. Till next time.